Hi, this is Dr. Carl Goldkamp. If you're interested in learning about the ketogenic diet like I was, to save my own life, then this is probably the podcast for you. 8 years ago, I knew nothing about it. 6 years ago, it saved my life. 3 years ago, I started researching and talking with some of the authorities in the field and attending medical conferences about this to understand why and how keto so dramatically changed my and my wife's Judi's lives. The purpose of this podcast is to share our journey of discoveries with you in understanding how keto is so effective in improving so many different conditions, from obesity, epilepsy, diabetes, infertility, MS, Alzheimer's, heart disease, to name a few. So take a step away from all the hype you've probably heard and roll up your sleeves with me and join me weekly to explore this living miracle that anyone can access. We'll talk science, we'll talk food. We'll explore its history and evolution to today, which is that the sheer wonder of the ketogenic way of eating has changed untold number of lives, unlike anything before it. And in case I forget to mention it, please join our Facebook group, Keto Naturopath. Hi, this is Dr. Goldkamp, and welcome back to another episode of the Keto Naturopath. Today we're going to talk about something pretty painful. Well, painful if this is about your situation in particular. Gout and the causes behind it. So the labs behind it is really elevated uric acid or elevated UA. So where does uric acid come from? I think you need to know that first. Generally, it's how I generally considered it before, like these previous decades of looking at the labs. I've never really valued it that much because it was kind of a redundant lab to other things. It was redundant to BUN creatinine. It was redundant to insulin levels and so on. But basically, uric acid is the body's way of getting away with nitrogenous wastes. That's it. So when you break down proteins, you got this thing that you got to take care of. So it's a little more sophisticated than that. And that was kind of the overall sort of basics of like, all right, uric acid. You eat a lot of protein, your uric acid's going to go up. But those things are only partly true. So I'm going to talk about uric acid. I'm going to talk about gout because this has a lot to do with those who go through keto. There's in my view, I don't know if it's documented, in my view, from people I've worked with, elevated incidence of gout, certainly elevated uric acid. And it gets worse if you go to ketovore or carnivore, because there's not a lot of education around what is a carnivore diet. And I don't mean you just borrowed somebody's definition. It hasn't been around that long. So it is not like a diet that has a definition of even 10 years, I was about to say, probably 5 years. And so it's not locked in. It could be anything you want. You're a carnivore because you eat primarily meat. Okay, good for you. Somebody says, no, I can have honey, but I can't have dairy. And they think they're a better carnivore than somebody else. Guess what? I could really care at the definition either way. It doesn't work for me. It doesn't add any sort of benefit. It doesn't add a layer of education, or it doesn't add a level of clarity for people to understand, what this is. Should they eat this way? Should they not eat this way? And what the heck does it mean? And then you meld it into a thing called ketovore, which is kind of people doing keto, which is low carb, maybe high fat, maybe not high fat, somewhat appropriate protein, but they don't have that really spelled out. Someplace in the neighborhood of 1.5 grams per pound of ideal body weight, loosely. They're not even aware. So if you were to ask anybody, how much protein do you have a day? I don't know, it's enough. So it's really loosey-goosey, unfortunately. But the issue of uric acid and the issue of gout becomes front and center for a number of people. And so let me just sort of give you the sort of background on what it takes to increase uric acid and what it takes to create gout. And they're basically the same thing, except not everybody who has elevated uric acid, or what they call hyperuricemia, not everybody who has elevated uric acid gets gout. And isn't that interesting? So you can have them elevated and others not. So what causes elevated uric acid? Really, up until in the last couple of years, the idea has been that it's either alcohol or purines. Purines are a breakdown of nucleic acids, and there are certain foods that are higher in purines than others. And they generally, of that stereotype is like, oh, seafoods are higher than purines. And so those who had gout couldn't have seafood, shrimp and sardines and so on. We'll get a little more specific later. And they shouldn't have alcohol. That was the list. So to that list that has been, I'll say, discovered or refined, because how I always looked at uric acid also was it was redundant to one's glycemic or metabolic degree of health. So if you have a lot of sugary foods, and sucrose is a combination of glucose and fructose, that you will have elevated uric acid. So in that way of having uric acid, which has nothing to do with purines, it has nothing to do with alcohol, it was sugar dependent, and it really corresponded to insulin resistance. Elevated uric acid usually meant there was an elevated insulin, and it may or may not mean there was an elevated glucose, because if your insulin is high enough, you just may have kind of normal, as we've looked at before in labs, a normal glucose, and therefore glucose by itself is kind of not useless, but it's insufficient to give you a bigger picture. You need to couple it with other things like fasting insulin, for instance. And if your endocrinologist isn't doing that, or your primary doctor isn't doing that, I'd go find another one or instruct him, this is what you would like to have done for yourself. Okay, then. So now we have, it's not just sweets that are the driver of elevated uric acid or alcohol or purines, but it's the fructose or fructose, however you want to pronounce it, of your sugary foods. So all sugary foods did raise your uric acid, but in part it was because, some people think solely because of the fructose part of that, not so much of the glucose part of that. So sucrose raises uric acid. The idea that fructose is the culprit and not glucose is kind of the new evolving idea. And it's an idea that's primarily been out there for about 5 or 6 years, and a number of interesting studies that kind of point to fructose versus being glucose. However, the number one associated cause of elevated uric acid is, drumbeat, it's alcohol. And some alcohols are better than other, but it's alcohol. And the story basically evolves like this, that beer is the worst because of the carbs that are in there. There's purines in that beer as well. Not all purines are, well, yeast comes from yeast, and yeast is technically a plant animal sort of thing. Anyways, it contains purines as it breaks down. So now you have purines and alcohol. You got a twofer in beer. Higher spirits such as the tequila, the vodkas, the whiskeys, and so on and so forth, they are a pretty clear culprit as well. But generally, wine has, it's alcohol, but wine seems to be the least offensive, or the least ability to drive up your uric acid. So, that was interesting. And then I've seen other studies saying, it really depends how much wine you have. Wine's as bad as anything else. It's alcohol, alcohol, alcohol. And the difference is it's a regular drinker, by the way, people who have their alcohol every day versus those who have it more seldom, and or weekend drinkers, or whatever you want to say, or they're out even, I won't say over binge drinkers, but the idea of regular drinking is worse than episodic drinking. Okay, so you got fructose, alcohol, and purines. That's pretty much the complete story as most of the world knows. However, myself being a high protein or protein sparing modified fast / ketovore, meaning I have mostly animal meats, whether it's chicken or fish and so on and so forth. And I've told you all about your omega-6s and your 3s and and all the foods. We've been through all of those things. We've looked at labs. And so I am an animal consumer, and I've come from a world of primarily plant consumers. I won't say our family was a vegetarian in any way, but we were all conscripted at a young age to take care of the vegetable garden. So we always harvested things annually, whether we lived in a suburb or whether we lived in the country. It was just something our family did. Then going through naturopathic medical school, they have a very strong emphasis on plant-based diet, which is becoming so trendy. And I think that that's a bad direction to go into if you're really thinking your life is just going to be plant-based. So there you go on that. I think you do need animal meats. And if you eat them as much as I do, I mean, it's the substance of my diet. I have, as I say, I don't have much in the way of plants. We use plants because we do have a number of raised bed gardens for our herbs. So we have the basil, we have the cilantro, we have the, yada, yada, yada. We make all different sauces and things about that. And that's how we use these. We don't have a salad. We used to have a huge salad garden a decade plus ago before our illness. So I'm adding to this list because it is very important for those of you that are like me, that love things like liver and organ meats. So what is organ meats? Organ meats are the liver, obviously. And liver is really about the only organ meat that most people can get now. Brain's no longer available, but it certainly was a common organ meat when I grew up. And up until about, 10 years ago, it was available in most grocery stores. You really can't get spleen. What they call sweetbread, which is thymus. These are all from beef for the most part, beef and cows. But you could, if you really looked for it, you could get sheep, and sheep's brains are more common actually, and goat. But in terms of the liver, you can get them from poultry. You can get them from ungulates, beef, goats, sheep. You really can't get lung. You can't get tripe anymore, which is stomach. What else? And kidneys you could get. Kidneys are still available, far less than they were, but they're just not that popular. So for every 1,000 of you that are listening right now, unless you're, listening from a far off part in the world, be it Oceania or the Middle East or Southeast Asia, you have a separate culture and you have access to things that we don't in the United States, where we sanitized ourselves against. It's no longer available to the general public, unfortunately. And certainly South America, I've been down to Costa Rica, and you can have anything you want there. I forgot about intestines, chitlins as they call it in the South here. And you actually can get chitlins if you know where to look for it. They're washed out, of course. So anyway, that's what organ meats are, but primarily it comes down to liver, kidney. Some people consider heart an organ meat. It's good. I don't really consider that I consider that a muscle, but that's up to you. Brain's no longer there. So all of these things, it really comes down to liver, maybe a little kidney when we talk about carnivore. And and liver is highly nutritious. I've talked about it. My two favorite foods are egg yolks and liver. However, whether we're talking about polar bear or whether we're talking about beef or whether we're talking about calves, it should actually be polar bear, calves, and then beef, that the intensity, the concentration of the nutrients in polar bear liver is very, very high. And certainly certain fish, Arctic fish like Arctic chard and so on and so forth, it's very high, but primarily it's high in two things. Vitamin A, really high in vitamin A, and fairly high in copper as well. So for one who loves their liver and have their pate for spreads and they, have it every day, and depending on, obviously nobody's having polar bear liver. And calf's liver is 3 times more intense, if you will. There's triple the level of vitamin A and triple the level of copper in calf's liver, which comes from beef, versus beef's liver, which is obviously an older animal. So that's a big difference. So if one is chowing down on calf's liver on a regular basis versus beef's liver, you'll have a whole different level. And it won't take you long to get to zoomingly high levels of vitamin A. So why is that a problem? I'm basically going to circulate saying the next thing that hasn't been talked about, that should be talked about, is vitamin A toxicity. Using these words loosely, I'm going to redefine these in a second. Vitamin A toxicity, meaning you're getting so much vitamin A, and you can sort of say behind that would be copper. When you're having liver on a regular basis, it's going to happen faster if you're having calves liver on a regular basis. And obviously, if you go beyond Arctic chard and polar bear, should that ever, if you're listening to me from northern Norway, which I have some friends that, watch yourself. But even then, if this is part of your culture, you don't do these things frequently. You do it as a special treat. There's a pate and so on and so forth, and it's not done on a daily basis. It's places like the United States that get very fad driven. Oh, this is the healthy way to eat. I'm going to start doing this every day. Well, they then bioaccumulate. They eat too much vitamin A because they want to do this healthy thing. And Dr. Goldkamp says his two favorite foods were liver and egg yolks. And I did say that, and I still stand by that. But you got to back off. The nutrient density is the word. Again, mostly with liver, it's about the vitamin A is the top of the list. And then second to that is copper. Is that you have to back off and can't have it all the time. It doesn't mean it's bad. It just means the nutrient density. So if you're having a less dense food, you can have that more often. If you're having a more dense food, you can have it less often. So the polar bear liver, as I did in one of my videos, is the amount of half the size of your pinky of an average person, even a quarter of the size of your pinky, would be the equivalent of half a plate of beef's liver. That's a big difference. I just said a quarter of your pinky to half a plate, dinner plate of liver. I should have said it was a quarter of a pinky was equal to a third of a plate of calf's liver to, I won't say it's almost a complete plate of beef's liver. That's the kind of concentration difference. That's a kind of nutrient density difference, and you have to be aware of that. You can't, right? So you can have polar bear liver, but you can have only a speck of it. You can have calf's liver, and you can have a little more of it. You can have beef's liver, and you can have a little more of it. All right, that's the point I'm trying to get across. Everything is toxic. It's relative to the dose, relative to how much you're going to consume. So a person who has liver once a week, and beef liver, they're fine. They'll probably never get toxic. They'll never get to accumulate. And because vitamin A, retinoic acid, is a fatty acid, it's a fat-soluble vitamin, it accumulates. You don't just pee it out into the next day. So it is a problem, just like vitamin D and all these others. So that is something you have to be aware of. The way nutrition is taught in the United States, which is, it's not taught at all, that people go, all right, I'm doing this healthy thing. And then they get toxic. So when you hear about carnivores, they go, I'm carnivore. I eat it head to tail. Well, I doubt they eat head to tail. I doubt they have brain or eyeballs or tongue very often, or all these other things. What it means is they have meat and they have liver. So that's 99.9%, and add a few decimal points to that. Of all the carnivores, that's what they're talking about. They're not talking about pickles, pig's feet. I doubt that, or the hoofs and all these other parts. It's kind of like tail, nose to tail. Nobody does it. They do too much liver, and the rest is meat. Because the idea before, how people came to gout, it was like the disease of kings and affluence. I think of Ben Franklin. Is that they had too much organ meat, especially back 200 years when any kind of organ meat was available. They did have a lot of organ meat. Now it's liver. You're having too much liver and you're getting too much vitamin A. And so vitamin A does, and I had to track this down. There's plenty of research, and it's no longer esoteric once you know where to look. Vitamin A by itself, consumed in the context of organ meats. It's not, vitamin A isn't that high in muscle meats, will lead to elevated levels of uric acid. Elevated levels of uric acid can and often does lead to gout, which is very painful. So that is a definitive cause. When we talk about organ meats, it was always a sort of like general organ meats. So you're talking about purines? That was the assumption. No, it's purines. It's the breakdown of the nucleic acids, in essence, is what this is. And it turns into a problem. It turns into uric acid, and it goes through a number of steps. The reason I say that is that if you were to have elevated uric acid, whether you have gout or not, on your labs, here's elevated uric acid, we got to work at this. A couple of things, if you came in and I saw that, I would certainly ask about, so I'd look at your glucose, and I would assume you did your insulin, and I would start thinking, first I'd think about insulin resistance and where is that in your life. Then obviously I'm looking at your diet, because it's required for you to do a chronometer diet week's worth before you see me. And now I get to see what your life is like, and I get to check to see, are you really having too much purines? Are you really having too much maybe vitamin A through, I doubt it, because very few people are that extreme. I was that extreme. And got myself in trouble, but I was never diagnosed with gout. I was diagnosed with pseudo-gout. How's that for an alternative name? You don't have a broken arm. You have a pseudo-broken arm. Is that a real thing? It happens to be pseudo-gout is a real thing, and there's enough of a difference. Slightly different crystals that are made, but let me tell you, it's just as painful. They tend not to give you the anti-gout medicines. They give you things that are non-steroidal anti-inflammatories like indomethacin, whereas with gout, and technically the difference between these diseases are diagnosed on the crystal, so they have to put in a needle and suck it out, or go presumptively by the case. That would be really painful. You're in enough pain. So for that they give you a number of things, the different drugs that either block the production of uric acid, which I'll tell you about in a second, or they keep it from being reabsorbed. That's pretty much it. That's all there is to it. That they either block it from being produced, and then you go, well, isn't there going to be a backup? A lot of the thing that it came from. It's true, but they haven't found that problem yet, or it hasn't been high enough to be a topic into itself. And the idea of keeping it from getting reabsorbed. So that's where the big pharma has come in. But the problem with pharmaceuticals like allopurinol and another one that I can't pronounce, they have side effects. They have side effects like liver toxicity. I bet you're real surprised to hear that. So consequently, what do you do? I mean, first of all, you see if you can identify the source. Is it fructose? Is it alcohol? Is it purines? Is it vitamin A? And other vitamins, such as niacin, can also drive it up. So you have to look at, vitamin A is a little more nefarious than you think, because it's a little more ubiquitous than just eating liver. So some of you are going to say, well, I don't eat liver, so I'm not going to worry about that one. Well, then let me look at your life a little bit. Let me say, show me the supplements you're taking. Oh, you're taking that multi that has vitamin A in it. Okay. Oh, and you're putting on a face cream that has vitamin A in it because you want to get rid of the wrinkles. Now, let me tell you, vitamin A toxicity, right? Meaning you're consuming too much of it over a short period of time. The body can't get rid of it. So consequently, you accumulate it and it becomes a problem, right? Whether it's liver or multivitamins or one of the things about vitamin A toxicity is your skin gets sandy and then actually starts to peel. You'll start to lose your hair. Your immune system will start to go downhill. Whether that comes across as more colds and flus, it really depends. It could be deeper. It could be more arthritic. Probably more than likely, you're going to get arthritic conditions first, because you're going to start feeling joint pains. It's one of these that you'll start feeling, and then you'll have larger immune problems, not just the colds and flus. So what is larger immune problems? You'd start with a joint pain. Does it go on to cancer? Well, what happens with too much vitamin A is you do suppress your immune system. So it can't activate like it should. So, pick your disease, you'll probably start growing one, kind of thing. But back to vitamin A, it's like when you look at the sources, it's not just from food. Nothing's just from food anymore. It's like, did it come as a supplement? Vitamin A is now supplemented in a number of foods. Look at the food you're eating. If you're eating anything in the way of processed food, you'll see vitamin A is added. All right, so there's vitamin A in the food you're eating, the processed food you're eating, plus your multiple vitamin. Oh, plus the stuff you put on your face. And so the reason I went off on the skin thing for the face thing, the cream, is because you're putting on vitamin A, retinoic acid, to actually do a face peel, whether you're wearing it or not, whether you're aware of it or not, you're putting it on your face to make yourself peel and give you that new skin. So when you put that on, you'll see the red glow. That red glow is the blood coming to help your skin that has just been assaulted because you've now taken topical vitamin A and you're forcing it to renew itself. So that's why the skin seems newer and younger and less wrinkles, is because you have now put on vitamin A, which is peeled off the old skin, called a skin peel or whatever. But that's the same thing. So you've given on a per location basis, a vitamin A toxic exposure, if you will. So that's usually your skin, your face, and I don't think anybody else puts it anywhere else, but that's it. So there's a continuity of how it reacts. It's not like, oh my gosh. So now you start adding these things. And now, is vitamin A in your hair cream? Is vitamin A in all your other cosmetics? Is it in your mascara? Is it in your makeup? Now you start looking at vitamin A and all the different sources. It's no longer we're living in the world of 100 years ago where if you didn't eat it, you weren't exposed to it. Now it's like you wear it, you put it on a daily basis. It's supplemented into your foods that you have. And by the way, the only place there's really global vitamin E deficiency is in intense poverty, in areas of intense endemic poverty, which is what they call sub-Saharan Africa. There's endemic areas of vitamin A deficiency, which is easy to rectify, and certain places in South America, and just, poverty in general. So it can exist in the United States, but it has to be that level of poverty, of incredibly poor nutrition, not getting enough to eat. So vitamin A is so ubiquitous, so nefarious in its we all need it. So without vitamin A, we'd have also a very poor immune system. So you need to get it up to a certain level, which we all pretty much have. It's unheard of in the United States if you're not of the category I just talked about, to have low vitamin A. So vitamin A is something that's not talked about by anybody, and yet there's this, check your uric acid. Your uric acid's so important to have. Uric acid, that's the big secret. Well, the uric acid can get elevated on a number of different things that you're doing. So you need to look at, let me see your diet. Let me see your labs. Let me make some correlations and see your life in essence. And so, yes, somebody who's eating, I'm looking at a can of sardines, somebody who's eating sardines or mackerel on a regular basis, which we also have, I have it periodically, that's certainly a path there. But the number one reason, this is now documented, is alcohol. The idea of vitamin A, that's not even put into the group. That's sort of a separate study. It should be put into it because I think people are much more elevated in their uric acid because of the vitamin A they're wearing, they're eating unbeknownst to them. It's in their multiple vitamins. I'm not talking about beta carotene. I'm talking about retinoic acid, retinol. And so that is a problem. And that's where that comes from. Boom. Then you could add in, if you're already sort of borderline high on vitamin A and you're doing it continuously and you're just sort of staying at that kind of semi-toxic level, then you can throw in these other little toxic levels that you brought along. And if your method of getting elevated vitamin A into you was through liver, then you can be sure you have elevated copper as well. And if it's not through liver, then you're just looking at vitamin A that's come through all these extraneous sources to come together. Now, add in, well, how much alcohol do you have? It doesn't have to be that much to bring uric acid over the threshold. And then you think about what kind. Now, if you are having fish, because fish is good in omega-3 and everybody knows that, so you're having your mackerel and your sardines, as I have, now it's what would have been kind of not enough to be significant. You're adding that little thing to the bigger scale of your overall vitamin A. And now if you are sneaking a can of soda and you have your high fructose corn syrup coming in from, name it, all those sodas, you've put yourself over the edge, and certainly you've put yourself towards more of your insulin resistance, but labs will determine those labels. So the point I wanted to get across is uric acid is fructose, alcohol, vitamin A, certainly purines, organ meats is what they would say. All those are culpable, but within those organ meats, I am showing you, not just suggesting, because the documentation is already there from a number of things saying vitamin A is there. And because it's been over-supplemented in these processed foods and people taking their multivitamin, they're already halfway there. It doesn't take them much liver to get them even higher. It doesn't take them much calves liver to get them, even less calves liver, to get them even higher in uric acid. And should you be a polar bear consumer, which I don't think they're liver consumer, you're like going to be there in a New York second. So that's about uric acid. And so the ways, as I said, that you either prevent the accumulation, the production of uric acid. How do you do that? Well, whether it's Chinese herbal medicine, and there's a number of interesting articles on Chinese herbal medicine as in research studies from China and Japan in the last couple of years, showing that, this whole thing of, they see gout as almost being the triggering event for other rheumatoid problems, other rheumatoid diseases, whether it's rheumatoid arthritis or other arthritic conditions. And so they see it as the triggering of other subsequent long-term conditions. And so they're now looking for other ways to treat this that are not just pharmaceuticals because of all the side effects the pharmaceuticals are having. Okay, so it's now become kind of a global thing. So you have, and anyways, they all come down to the same two ways of decreasing your uric acid. It's either you decrease the production, and it goes through all these steps, but the last step is this thing called xanthine, spelling with an X, oxidase. And xanthine oxidase takes the formation, that's the very last step to making uric acid. So if they can inhibit that or block that, or whatever word you want to use, that's a way of them. It's actually the last two steps that have to do with xanthine oxidase. So if you can block that, then you're good at reducing uric acid. So there's pharmaceuticals that do that. That's the allopurinol. There's Chinese herbs that do that. And that's a longer list, and it's pretty interesting. And formulas. Nobody just uses Chinese herbs, by the way. They use, in Chinese herbal medicine, it's a formula. And usually of at least a few herbs, if not as many as 10 and 20. But their objective is to treat the individual, not the condition. Okay, so they have that. And then the other way is to, when uric acid is made, it comes down into your kidneys, and your kidneys are the filters, right? They put things out into the urine, or they keep it into the bloodstream. And so what happens is, when it first comes down into the kidneys, it all gets excreted out to the urine, they say, and it's filtered. And it's stages of filtering. So they throw it all out, and they bring a little bit, they bring half of it back. And they throw out that half, and they bring some of that back. And so it finally gets finally targeted to how much they're actually going to reabsorb. So there's certain things that will inhibit to an extent, and you can pick your spot, the reabsorption of uric acid. So when it's first tossed out into what will become the urine, it goes down into the urine, that they keep it from being reabsorbed back into the blood. And guess what that is? And so, by the way, medications work that way too. And those are the ones that are famous for causing kidney and liver damage. But it ends up being this fat, omega-3 fats. So it's EPA, DHA, and even in this particular regard, ALA, which is the vegetable form that eventually becomes, it gets converted into EPA and DHA, that you take your omega-3s, which are long, right? They're long, 18 and 20 and 22, polyunsaturated fatty acids. So they're not saturated. They're double bonds, multiple, 2 and 3. So EPA and DHA, they basically inhibit the reabsorption or a degree of reabsorption. So by being appropriately high. Isn't this interesting? It's going to tie into the omega-6-3 ratio, and it's going to tie into your omega-3 index. If you are low, like most of the U.S. population is, they are more prone to have elevated uric acid. If you have too much omega-6, like most of the American population does because of the processed foods and vegetable oils and so on and so forth, and going out to restaurants and scarfing all the bad oil, you will have elevated uric acid. Elevated uric acid because the omega-3s having an appropriately high omega-3 would inhibit the reabsorption of uric acid, so that factor alone will drop down uric acid. So one more reason to be aware of your omega-3s, whether you take that as a supplement or a fish. It's always better in a fish form, being salmon. As much as we talk about sardines and mackerel, they're not really very fatty fish, as you know. Put some mackerel in a bowl and mush it up like I do. You go, wow, that's really pretty dry. I mean, it sucks the moisture out of your mouth. You have salmon, it's not that way at all. I don't think I've ever had Arctic char, but they're also delightfully fatty. So that is something. So now you just learned, and guess what else? All right, so that was on the reabsorption side. What else helps in terms of day-to-day things that reduce uric acid? Well, it ends up being coffee, and not because of the caffeine. Coffee, because of the polyphenolics, actually block xanthine oxidase. So now they've decreased the production of uric acid. So coffee drinkers, and this is very well documented, coffee drinkers have an advantage. And now you're thinking, well, what about tea drinkers? The only reason you switched to thinking about tea drinkers from coffee drinkers, even though I said it was no caffeine was associated with this, that had nothing to do with the effect. It was the polyphenols. Well, guess what? It's not good news for tea drinkers. Tea drinkers, having tea and being a tea drinker, especially if you're in Asia, is independently correlated with elevated uric acid levels. So what works for coffee does not work for tea. I understand you've worked so hard to like green tea, and I'm telling you, well, if you're close to elevated uric acid, then I would switch to coffee. But if it's not an issue, stay with green tea, because green tea has a lot of other good things in it. Anyway, I wanted to go over that. So that was sort of my summary about uric acid. We're getting this simplistic story that's now being put out there, and books are on. It's like, well, fructose is the new thing added to elevating your uric acid. Well, fructose was always part of sucrose, which is glucose and fructose. So it was part of what we looked at. Maybe we didn't know that it was fructose that was the driver of that, but it's not going to change. It certainly is not going to change me, how I talk to people. Do you think I ever would have said, oh, you could have soda, high fructose corn syrup, but you can't have donuts? I don't think so. So it's not going to change. It's not like a new thing. It's an interesting, curious thing. And uric acid, I really never put much value in before because I already had the other data. And by knowing the uric acid levels number now, unless you have gout, then I would be more critical of uric acid and work with that because it's so diagnostic with gout. It was just not that helpful. In fact, I stopped taking it in the last 3 or 4 years, but now that it's become such a topic, I'm putting it back into my massive panel of labs that I give people to take, more just to correlate how it's not really useful in the big picture, but it has an interesting story if you add vitamin A, and if you start looking at your omega-6-3 and your omega-3 index relative to uric acid levels as a correlation, that would make it interesting. So I hope I haven't burned your ear for too long, and I hope you picked up something about that, because I'm going to be putting some more into a video to go over a little more research base, get down to what you can do and what the research tells us about that. That's another little rabbit hole that we'll go down together, I hope. Take care. Bye-bye. Hi, this is Dr. Goldkamp again for a brief reminder of something I completely forget to do at the end of every episode. You've heard me talk long enough in many different episodes, but what I would love you to do, and many of you have already done this, I just want to reinforce this particular behavior, which is to send me your questions. Send me your questions on anything you have about keto. If there's something that I don't know, I will look it up. And if it's something that intrigues me, I will probably make an episode a podcast about that particular topic. So what you need to do is to send me your questions at drgoldkamp@ketonaturopath.com. So that's drgoldkamp at ketonaturopath.com. Dr. Goldkamp at ketonaturopath.com. Feel free to join our Facebook group, which is also ketonaturopath.com. That's been growing lately. You also have to answer a questionnaire should you choose to join. And I don't ask for your email. I ask that you follow our terms. I try to avoid advertising and the obvious interruptions of just a good Facebook group. So hope to see you at one place or other. Please send me your questions and look forward to talking to you and getting to know you. Take care.